I remember the exact moment I realized I'd been erased without anyone saying a word. It wasn't in a board meeting or during an annual review. It was 8:43 a.m. on a Thursday, standing in the lobby of our San Diego headquarters, holding a cooling cup of black coffee. When she walked in, white sneakers, a cropped designer jacket, and oversized sunglasses that screamed TikTok royalty. No badge, no security check. Just walked past the reception desk like she was late for a brunch reservation in Malibu. And the CEO himself, Richard Elkins, came downstairs to greet her. Let me explain something. Richard doesn't shake hands. He doesn't do small talk. I've worked with him for 19 years, and I've never once seen the man smile like that. But that morning, he smiled like this girl was the golden ticket to the future of the company, to his legacy. She finally looked at me, head tilted, fake-friendly smirk, and said, "You must be Tyler. I think I'm replacing you." It wasn't fear I felt. It was colder than that. A system pinged deep in my chest, quiet, exact, like a sensor warning just before a major hardware crash. I'd been with Elkins Logistics Solutions since before we had a cloud infrastructure. I'd written the predictive supply chain engine that helped us win the Trans-Global contract. And now, I was being phased out for the CEO's 24-year-old niece with a communications degree and a trending Pinterest board. But here's the thing. They thought they were just upgrading the UI. They forgot that I was the operating system. You don't replace 19 years of blood, logic, and code with a press release and a pretty face. Not unless you want the foundation to fight back. They officially revoked my access at 10:24 a.m. By 2:09 p.m., I had shut down their $970 million network without breaking a single line of code. Not out of revenge, out of principle. This is the story of how they fired the guy who built their empire, and how, in exactly 6 seconds, I took it all back. The executive conference room on the 27th floor was never used unless something serious was happening. Serious in a way that usually meant someone's world was about to tilt off its axis. It was a room designed for power plays, 12 leather chairs, a marble table long enough to host a deposition, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific that made you feel both important and disposable at the same time. And that morning, my name was the only thing in the meeting invite. No subject line, no sender, just a location and timestamp. 9 a.m. sharp. As I stepped off the elevator and approached the half-open door, I caught sight of 3 people inside. Richard Elkins, seated at the head of the table with his hands clasped and his eyes fixed on the tabletop, like it might offer him a way out of whatever he was about to say. Dana Hall from HR, who usually greeted everyone with a warm smile and a joke, but now wore the kind of neutral expression only corporate legal teams teach. And finally, her, Madison Elkins, the CEO's niece, sitting in the CTO's usual seat like it had always belonged to her, a tablet glowing in her lap, and a Vinny iced latte sweating on the table beside her like she was just catching up on emails between influencer brand deals. No one spoke when I walked in. I shut the door gently behind me, took the seat closest to the windows, and let my eyes land briefly on each of them before settling on Richard. My pulse was steady, but there was that quiet, familiar pressure behind my ribs, like when a system starts misfiring quietly. No crashes yet, just warnings blinking softly if you know where to look. "Tyler," Richard said, his voice clipped and overly rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "You've been with us for nearly 2 decades, longer than most people ever last in this business." I nodded slowly, unsure if I was about to be honored or buried. "But as the industry evolves, so must our leadership," he continued. "And we believe it's time to bring in new energy, fresh vision. Madison will lead that transition." 12 words. No apology. No explanation. Just strategy. I blinked once. The words didn't hit all at once. They unspooled in my mind like corrupted lines of code I couldn't fully parse. "So, this is a restructuring?" I asked, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. Dana leaned in slightly, her tone sterile. "This isn't a reflection of performance, Tyler. It's about alignment. With our future direction." That meant nothing. That was HR speak for you're being removed, but we'd prefer not to be sued. Richard slid a folder across the table toward me, like he was offering a menu. "We've prepared a generous exit package. Of course, We'll expect you to transition your team cleanly. My hand stayed still, my throat dry, but I didn't speak. Not yet. I opened the folder with practice comm, and that's when I saw it. 3 signatures. My name, my role, my termination, and the third signature, Hugo Alvarez. My closest ally. The guy I pulled into the company 16 years ago. The one I mentored through crash recoveries, overnight server rebuilds, the time we fought off a ransomware breach at 3 a.m. on New Year's Eve. His ink was fresh on the page. It felt like betrayal written in Helvetica. I looked up at Madison, who gave me a practice smile, all teeth and ambition. I'm so excited to learn from what you've built, Tyler, she said, chipper like she was announcing a podcast launch. You've laid an incredible foundation for me to inherit. Inherit. Like I was dead. Like the obituary had been published, and she was already walking through my digital grave, picking out the valuables. I closed the folder carefully and stood up, deliberate in my movements. Am I allowed to say goodbye to my team? Dana offered a half smile. Of course. We prefer if you kept it neutral. Neutral. Like the 20 years I gave this company could be boiled down into something neutral. Like my silence would help keep the stock price steady. I didn't answer. I just walked out. But as I stepped into the hallway, something in me shifted. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Sharper. A presence that settled into my chest like compressed air waiting to release. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But I had something better. Access. And they had no idea what I still controlled. I didn't take the elevator down right away. I stood there for a moment outside the conference room, folder in hand, watching the office hallway I used to walk through like it was home. Now it felt like enemy territory. I walked back to my office, slow, steady, as if my feet knew it was the last time they traced this path. It was quiet. Too quiet for 9:20 on a weekday. No one made eye contact. No one offered a word. The kind of silence that only happens when people know what's happening but pretend they don't. The kind of silence that smells like shame and self-preservation. When I opened my office door, something inside me clenched. This place had been my second home for nearly 2 decades. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the slight click from my dual monitors booting up, the half-dead succulent from that Christmas party 3 years ago. My system whisperer, mug still sat in the corner of the desk with a faint coffee ring underneath, and the photo of my dog, Baxter, grinned at me from the shelf like he didn't know we'd both just been evicted. I didn't pack angrily. I didn't throw anything. I moved with quiet precision, one item at a time into a cardboard box. Laptop dock, framed photo, backup hard drives, cables coiled like sleeping snakes. Every object held a memory. Late-night fixes, product launch adrenaline, victory pizzas at 2 a.m. As I packed the last notepad, a shadow appeared in my doorway. I didn't need to turn and know it was Hugo. He lingered a second, like a man standing on a trapdoor. Tyler, he started, voice lower than usual. I didn't know what else to do. I kept my hands moving. You signed it. I know. They told me if I didn't go along, the whole department could be at risk. Realignment. Downsizing. My name was next. You know, I've got 2 kids. I looked up at him finally. Yeah, I also remember when you had a spine. He winced like I'd slapped him. And maybe I had. With the truth. I'm sorry, he said, eyes fixed on the carpet. And I could tell he meant it. But it didn't matter anymore. I turned to grab my bag. When did they pull my admin credentials? I asked, not even looking at him. He hesitated. 4 days ago. I froze. 4 days ago. They stripped my access before that meeting was even scheduled. Before Madison shook my hand. Before I showed up early all week troubleshooting issues in the system she didn't even understand yet. I nodded once, slowly. Got it. And with that, I walked past him, box in hand, and headed for the elevator. When I reached the badge scanner outside my office, I swiped one last time. It lit green. Still authorized. Their systems thought I still belonged. I left the badge on the desk, face up. A final line of code in a program they thought they'd overwritten. As I passed the HR kiosk, something tugged at me. I paused, looked around. The terminal was unattended. I stepped behind the desk, heart calm but focused. Logged in using my still active credentials. The system booted up instantly. Admin panel, privileges, transition logs. There it was. A clear entry. Transfer of full infrastructure access. From Tyler Grayson to Madison Elkins. Effective Monday, 10:07 a.m. Today was Thursday. They'd handed over my life's work to a social media strategist before I even knew she existed. I logged out. No trace. No breadcrumbs. I picked up my box and left the building. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. But I wasn't bitter, because that quiet chill behind my ribs, it had turned into something more now. It was resolve. Back in my apartment that afternoon, I didn't unpack. I placed the box in the corner and sat down at the kitchen table with my old personal laptop, the one they never touched, the one that wasn't linked to the corporate network. I opened my archive and searched for a keyword, Intellectual Property Transfer 2022. There it was, the email thread with legal. I'd never signed the document transferring full rights to the architecture I developed. They'd asked me to, pressured me, but I had pushed back. The language was too broad, too vague. It would have let them sell or license the system I built without ever giving me credit or consent. I refused to sign, and they never followed up. I scrolled down to the last line. Until revisions are made to reflect collaborative ownership or a clearly defined scope, I cannot sign this document. No reply. No countersigned version. Then I remembered something else. An internal memo from legal. I searched again. IP clarification, October 14th, 2022. And there it was, from their own internal counsel. Due to the nature of Tyler Grayson's independent development prior to formal integration with Elkins infrastructure, explicit signature is required to enforce IP transfer. Without that signature, they didn't legally own the system. They were running a multinational logistics empire on a system they didn't legally possess. I leaned back in my chair and stared out at the sunset bleeding across the San Diego skyline. They thought they'd cut me out. What they didn't realize was that the system was still listening to me, and it was about to respond. The strange thing about working in systems for 2 decades is you stop trusting simplicity. Nothing that works well is ever simple. Not really. And the more polished it looks on the outside, the more you know the internal wiring's probably patched together with duct tape, caffeine, and legacy code someone swore they'd replace next quarter. Which is why I never trusted the mainframe at Elkins to keep secrets. And that's also why I built my own. 3 years ago, during a month-long migration sprint that left most of us sleeping on bean bags and surviving off red vines and lukewarm burritos, I spun up what I called a shadow node. Technically, it was a QA environment, a test sandbox, but one with full visibility into the entire infrastructure. It had no live permissions, no write access to production, and wasn't even registered in the primary admin registry. I named it K41_Ghost, just obscure enough that even if someone stumbled across it, they'd think it was a leftover dev branch from a failed stress test. It wasn't. It was a mirror, and it was still alive. I logged in late that night, backlit by the glow of my kitchen's under-cabinet LEDs, a mug of oversteeped chamomile beside me, Baxter asleep at my feet. The dashboard blinked to life like it had just been waiting for me. Not purged, not wiped. Still purring in the background like a forgotten server in a dark room no one dared open. I scanned the logs. Madison had gone live. She wasn't just sitting in my old chair pretending to reimagine the future. She was actively rewriting core files. I saw her username attached to modified scripts, deleted audit checks, and this one made me sit back. Renamed Load Balance Protocols. She was in the architecture, deep in it, touching code she didn't even understand, stripping out safeguards I'd built during literal disasters, like the time we nearly lost our EU chain because of a corrupted vendor packet from a Polish distributor. She didn't understand that code wasn't decoration. It was safety, and she was cutting the brakes on a freight train she'd never even learned to drive. I could have shut all down right then, pulled the plug, but this wasn't about vengeance. Not yet. This was about leverage. I opened the dormant kernel I'd hidden under a stack of decoy files. Originally, it was designed to alert me if someone escalated privileges without proper authorization. A tripwire. That night, I rewrote it. If admin account Tyler Grayson was ever removed or disabled, the system would trigger Cascade Lock Protocol. Cascade Lock didn't destroy data. It didn't even shut down servers. It just froze everything. All operations would stall. Data intact, but unreadable. Code untouched, but unreachable. The entire system would sit there, blinking and humming, useless to everyone, until the lock was reversed by one thing. My biometric confirmation. No passwords. No recovery emails. No reset tokens. Just me. I typed each line manually. No scripts. No version history. Just raw input buried under 6 layers of decoy comments and encrypted aliases that would look like garbage code to anyone else. And before I logged out, I did one last thing. I pulled every time-stamped instance of Madison's activity, screenshotted every alteration, every permission shift, every deleted failsafe she called outdated, compiled it all into a tidy PDF, named it inheritance.pdf, because that's what she said, right? I'm so excited to inherit what you built. Let her inherit the consequences, too. When I closed my laptop, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel rage. I felt something sharper. Control. They thought they'd erased me from their digital ecosystem. They had no idea I was the ecosystem. And the real system? It was about to correct its course. The YouTube Live link hit my inbox at 10:43 a.m. No message. No subject. Just a hyperlink. Sent anonymously from a former dev who once cried in my office after a brutal code review and then went on to become one of our best backend engineers. The title of the stream read, Elkin's Logistics Presence, the Future of Global Coordination, Powered by Sync Core. Of course, they named it that. Something polished, youth-focused, startup slick. Sync Core. Probably tested that name in a room full of interns with ironic tattoos and slide decks made on Notion. I didn't plan to watch it, but curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when you know exactly what they're about to walk into. At 11 o'clock sharp, the stream began. High production value. Lights dimmed just right. Music that tried too hard to sound like innovation. And then Madison walked on the stage wearing a white suit 2 sizes too large, sleeves rolled like some knockoff Steve Jobs, trying to look disruptively casual. She was smiling too much. Rehearsed. Stiff. The kind of smile that twitches when the teleprompter skips a line. Today, she beamed. We're launching a new era. One designed by digital natives for a digital future. I sipped my tea. Chamomile. Still warm. Behind her, a massive LED screen animated logistics flowcharts, predictive AI visuals, warehouse drone coordination, a visual parade of systems she barely understood but had been handed the keys to anyway. No mention of the previous architect. No nod to the foundation. Just gloss. Just guts. Then came 11:15. And now, she said, clicking her presentation remote with flair, we'll demonstrate real-time vendor load prediction powered by Sync Core's proprietary engine. Click. The screen hesitated. Just a flicker. Barely a second. But I saw it. Click. And then it started. Read. First one line. Then a whole column of text. Error messages flashing faster than her polished brain could compute. Vendor matrices scrambled. Load balancers reset midstream. Supply chain simulation outputs exploded into a wall of 504 distributed timeout errors. The words unauthorized script detected blinked center screen, followed by the most poetic of phrases. Core logic interrupted. Recovery unavailable. Gasps filled the room. The front row pulled out their phones. From where I sat, in my apartment miles away, I could already see the hashtags blooming on Twitter. Hashtag SyncFail. Hashtag Elkins Meltdown. Hashtag Madison Crash. Hashtag Legacy Code Strikes Back. Madison froze. For the first time, the filters cracked. She looked behind her, as if the LED screen itself might apologize. Then to her right, to someone off camera. She mumbled something about a brief delay, her voice no longer confident, but cracking at the edges. The camera caught the tremble in her hand. The system didn't crash, it locked. Exactly as designed. Every operation suspended, not destroyed. Data preserved, yet unreachable. Their supply chain engine had become a gleaming digital tomb. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply let the system behave the way it was designed to behave in the presence of incompetence. By 11:26 a.m., Elkin stock had dipped 7%. By noon, it would be 14%. I poured a fresh cup of tea and stepped out onto my balcony, the California sun sharp on my face, the air dry and light. Behind me, chaos was unfolding, Slack channels screaming, emergency calls lighting up every director's phone, IT teams tripping over audit logs they no longer understood. But around me, silence, stillness, and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They'd revoked my badge, revoked my name, deleted my presence. But they forgot the one thing that always mattered most. You don't fire the brain and expect the body to walk. The call came in at 3:30 p.m. I was in my apartment, seated at the small round table near the window, sunlight stretching across my laptop, and a forgotten cup of tea gone cold for the second time that day. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I knew the rhythm, the area code, the tension I could already feel buzzing through the device before I even picked it up. It was him, Richard A. Elkins, my former boss, the man who once told a boardroom I was overseasoned in front of 3 junior execs, the man who hired his niece to modernize a system she couldn't spell. I let it ring once, twice, then answered without a word. "Tyler," he said, my name, spoken softly, stretched, almost like an apology. He had never used my first name before, not in 19 years. I'd always been Grayson at best, him at worst. We've got a situation," he continued, his voice dipped in carefully measured professionalism. But underneath, cracks, a businessman clenching a lifeline. There's been some instability, a disruption in our core functions. The vendor loadouts aren't syncing. Our backups aren't responding. And there's some indication your credentials were involved in a few legacy nodes. We're trying to assess what happened. I remained silent. Outside, a cyclist drifted past. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm chirped once, then went silent. But in my apartment, the only sound was the tap of condensation dripping down the side of the teacup. Richard filled the space. I was hoping he paused, recalibrating, wondering if he might have a moment to help us make sense of this. Not as an employee, of course, just as someone who knows this system better than anyone. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood, walking slowly toward the sliding door, looking out over the skyline of a city that had given me nothing except perspective. "You revoke my access," I said calmly. There was silence on the line. Then, "We can reverse that, if needed." I closed the balcony door, returned to the table. "You think I care about access?" I said, flat, steady. "You think this is about credentials?" He didn't answer. Then came the offer. "We can compensate you," Richard said, now fast-talking like a man in a burning house offering to buy the fire extinguisher. "Structure a consulting arrangement. Advisory role. Remote. Flexible. Retroactive attribution on the architecture, if you want. Whatever it takes to stabilize things." At that moment, I glanced at my laptop. On screen, #Elkins collapse was now trending number 3 globally. 3 major clients had already issued public statements freezing operations pending technical clarification. Insider leaks were flooding Reddit and tech blogs. One early memo from Indigo Maritime's legal counsel called the outage a structural breach of operational integrity. I set the call on speaker and leaned back in my chair. "Richard," I said, voice quiet but full. He stopped breathing. I could hear it. "I'm not your employee. I don't owe you anything." Another pause. Longer. Then the tone shifted just a little. That edge I remembered. "But you built this," he said, desperation starting to curdle into arrogance. "Don't you care that it's falling apart?" I closed the laptop. "No," I said. "I care that it's finally free of the people who never deserved it." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need to. "Good luck, Richard," I said. Then I hung up. And just like that, the man who once owned the building, the title, the room, and every conversation was gone from my life in a single click. There was no triumph in me, no victory cry. What I felt was something older. Relief. Because that was the moment I knew they hadn't fired me. They had released me. It wasn't 5 minutes after I hung up on Richard Elkins that my phone buzzed again. This time, the number wasn't anonymous. The name that lit up my screen was Daniel Vega, Executive Vice President of Infrastructure at Phoenix Tech. A name I hadn't spoken aloud in years, but one that hadn't lost its weight. Phoenix Tech was Elkin's primary rival in the Trans-Global contract bid 2 years ago. The bid they lost, largely because of a system I built. A system they had studied, admired, tried to replicate, and failed. I let it ring once before answering. Tyler Grayson, I said. His voice was calm, precise, the kind of corporate smoothness you only hear from someone who still polishes his leather shoes and never sends an email without a red receipt. Mr. Grayson, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I didn't respond. We've heard about the transition at Elkins, he said, careful with his words. And also about the, unexpected system behavior this morning. Still, I said nothing. He cleared his throat. We prefer not to reinvent the wheel. We're interested in what you built. More importantly, we're interested in what you could build next. There was a pause. Not awkward, but intentional. He was giving me space to speak first. I didn't. He adjusted. I'm authorized to extend a formal offer, he continued, voice low and certain. Full architectural control, clean budget, no red tape, and co-founder equity, if you're willing to lead our infrastructure division. That last part landed differently. Not a role, not a contract, a stake, ownership. I looked down at the table where my laptop still sat closed, the edges faintly warm from the system I had just locked from the world. The same hands that had typed line after line for someone else's company, someone else's legacy, were now being offered something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I'd like to discuss this further, I said, finally. But not over the phone. Of course, Daniel replied immediately. We'll fly you out first class. Tomorrow. Tomorrow's good. He thanked me, left his assistant's number, and hung up. I sat in silence. Not shock, not celebration, just stillness, the kind that comes after the noise dies, when the storm has passed, and the air is too quiet. I didn't call anyone, didn't post, didn't even smile, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding. The next morning, the flight to Phoenix was exactly what I needed it to be. Quiet. First class always is. No unnecessary small talk. Just warm towels, soft lighting, and the kind of gentle service that lets you exist without interruption. I didn't think about Elkins. I didn't think about Madison or Hugo or the server room that had gone dark on livestream. I thought about design, clean logic, elegant infrastructure, something faster, leaner, smarter, something mine. Daniel met me at the gate himself. He was taller than I remembered, mid-40s, navy blue suit, hair graying at the temples but still perfectly cut. He introduced me to his CTO, a woman named Priya Singh, quiet eyes, tightly held notebook, a kind of brilliance you could sense before she even said a word. They didn't waste time. No office tour. No handshakes for PR. By 4 p.m., we were in a glass-walled strategy room overlooking Camelback Mountain. I laid it out on the whiteboard. Everything I had built and everything I hadn't yet. Not a recreation of Elkin's systems, but a rebirth. Phoenix wasn't just a name. It was what came next. By 6:15 p.m., they had provisioned a private node for me inside their internal sandbox cluster. No restrictions, no layered approvals, just a terminal waiting for my hand. And as the Arizona sun dipped behind the horizon and the sky turned that dark orange only the desert can make, I sat down. No ceremony, no applause, just the soft hum of a new beginning. I didn't copy Elkin's framework. I didn't port their architecture. What I built that night was new. A clean foundation. A framework designed for resilience, for speed, for scale. A system that could survive incompetence because it was built on intention. And as I wrote, line after line, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. I wasn't looking for a fight. Not anymore. Not after the server lockout. Not after the phone call from Richard. Not even after the equity offer from Phoenix Tech. But then I made the mistake of typing 2 words into a browser window out of sheer habit just before shutting down for the night. Gen ZYNC Core. That was what they were calling it now. Madison's rebranded version of my infrastructure, dressed up in neon colors, sprinkled with buzzwords, and fed to the public like it was born in a WeWork kitchen during an influencer collab. The search results poured in. A press release, 2 LinkedIn posts, and a blog article from some glossy tech magazine, quoting Madison as the visionary architect behind the Sync Core platform redefining the future of global logistics. I read it twice, then a third time, and there it was, the phrase that turns stillness into ice. Filed with the U.S. Copyright Office, March 3rd, platform name, Gen ZYNC Core. Owner, Madison Elkins. Category, original software architecture. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, eyes narrowed, breath measured. She hadn't just renamed my work. She claimed it. And not just in a marketing campaign or in some internal document that could be argued as branding language. No, she filed it legally. Claimed copyright ownership over an architecture she had neither written, deployed, nor understood. Worse, she'd used almost the exact same language I had written in my 2021 white paper, a document that had never been shared publicly, stored only on a drive I kept off-network, time-stamped and legally traceable. A system summary that outlined the modular logic layers, contingency failover architecture, and a vendor load timing matrix, line for line. It wasn't ignorance. It was theft. But I didn't rage, didn't text, didn't call. I opened a new tab, navigated to the U.S. Copyright Office's infringement alert portal. Anonymous submission. Supporting documents attached. My original white paper. Get history logs from 2020 to 2022. Metadata from my sandbox mirror node. Screenshots of Madison's unauthorized edits. A legal summary of Elkin's failed IP transfer process. I didn't need to name her. I didn't need to name myself. The facts spoke louder than emotion. I clicked submit. No explosion. No cinematic background score. Just a confirmation. Your message has been received. I sat there, letting the silence expand around me like armor. I didn't feel satisfaction, just calibration, correction, because sometimes justice doesn't come with noise. Sometimes it arrives wearing a black and white PDF buried inside a quiet system. Let her walk into a minefield she designed with stolen maps. Let her ride the spotlight straight into legal fire. I didn't have to chase vengeance. I'd already built it into the architecture. The live stream was already counting down when I opened the link. No message, no sender, just a URL sent from a burner email. The subject line reading only, "You'll want to see this." I did. The page loaded cleanly, YouTube's classic interface, embedded inside a private corporate blog from Elkin's tech title card, slick and polished, black background with bold white type. Sync Core, redefining global efficiency, live launch. Underneath, a timer, 1 minute and 22 seconds and ticking. The chat had been disabled. The likes hidden. It was designed to be clean, controlled, PR perfect. A stage-managed performance to reclaim their narrative after weeks of speculation, legal whispers, and shareholder panic. They were going to make a show out of this. So was I. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, black, no sugar, then sat back in my Phoenix Tech office, overlooking a skyline, still bathed in morning sun. No drama, just silence and glass. At exactly 11 a.m. Pacific, the stream began. The lights, the music, the camera angle. It was Madison at center stage, dressed in all white again. Another ill-fitted blazer, another attempt to emulate Silicon Valley elegance through thrifted influencer chic. She smiled too wide, her eyes blinking just a beat too often, and launched straight into a speech I recognized instantly as media coached. "This is more than a system," she declared. "It's a statement." A pause. She held the moment. Sync Core isn't just logistics. It's living code, built by a new generation of thinkers, designed to move global supply like never before. Not once did she mention me. Not once did she acknowledge the engineers who stayed overnight to stabilize her reckless edits. Not once did she credit the foundation she now stood on. She didn't need to. The system would do it for her. At 11:14 a.m., she lifted the presentation remote. "And now," she said, "I'd like to show you something special. Live vendor load prediction, powered by Sync Core's proprietary engine." Click. 1 second of delay. Barely noticeable. She clicked again. That's when it happened. The screen behind her, once filled with glossy animations and seamless data flows, shuddered. Then flickered. Then turned red. Error 504. Distributed server timeout. Unauthorized script detected. Core logic interrupted. Recovery unavailable. There was a gasp from the audience. A few interns in the front row looked visibly shaken. One woman near the exit began typing furiously into her phone. Madison froze. For a moment, she tried to smile through it. It looks like we're experiencing a minor delay. The screen shifted again. Now the fail report was live. Projected. Public. Scrolling fast. It exposed version mismatches. Unauthorized logic bypasses. It named her account credentials. The final push ID matched her internal user key. Her fingerprints were all over the failure. And worst of all, the platform wasn't crashing. It was freezing. Stalled mid-execution. No restore point. No audit trail. No rollback. The system hadn't failed. It had obeyed, because it had been programmed by me to lock out anyone who tried to manipulate core logic without permission. And that moment she clicked, that was the trigger. The lockout protocol. The one I'd buried 6 layers deep. Inside the ghost node no one remembered. The one Hugo never noticed. The one no script could trace unless you built the skeleton yourself. The fallout came fast. By 11:17, Twitter was exploding. By 11:20, tech news blogs posted screenshots. By 11:24, Elkin stock halted trading on a 12% drop. The camera tried to pull back, but not before it caught the tremor in Madison's hand as she whispered something off mic. Someone rushed the stage. The lights dimmed. Then, the stream went black. Not because of the system. Because of the shame. I didn't gloat. Didn't grin. Didn't even speak. I simply closed the stream window, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence settle. Because sometimes the loudest message is the system you leave behind, and what it chooses to do when it knows who doesn't belong. 1 year to the day. That's how long it took. 365 days since I walked out of Elkins with a cardboard box in my hands and 21 years of service trailing behind me like a ghost. But the building wasn't the same anymore. The name out front had changed. Phoenix Global Systems. Sleek brushed steel letters mounted against dark glass, catching the morning light in a way that made them feel inevitable, like they had always been meant to replace what came before. I stood just inside the lobby for a moment, letting the hum of the elevator chimes and soft echoes of footsteps wash over me. The same space that once swallowed my presence now felt aware. Not of my power, not my title, but of my permanence. I didn't carry anything this time. No badge, no box, no folder full of HR euphemisms. I didn't need them. The young woman behind a reception desk looked up from her tablet, perfectly poised in a navy suit, and smiled with genuine ease. Her eyes flicked up, recognition landing before a word escaped her mouth. "That's you, isn't it?" She tilted her head slightly toward the wall beside her, toward the framed photograph now mounted in minimalist steel. Black and white. Clean. It was me, mid-sentence, arm extended toward a digital whiteboard during a Phoenix Tech Leadership Summit. Not posed, not polished, just caught in the act of explaining the thing I loved most. How systems speak when people listen. Beneath the image, a silver plate read, "Tyler Grayson, Architect of the Future." I gave a slight nod. The receptionist's eyes widened. "It's such an honor. Everyone talks about what you built. It's kind of legendary now." Legendary. I never set out to be that. I just wanted to build something that worked, and to make sure the people who didn't deserve to break it never got the chance again. I stepped into the elevator. No one looked through me this time. The junior architect standing beside me glanced over nervously and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," he said. I nodded once. Didn't need to say more. At the top floor, the doors opened to a space that hummed with motion, controlled, purposeful motion. Teams working in low voices. Screens filled with frameworks and diagnostics. No ego. No theatrics. Just people who cared more about what they were building than how it looked on a slide deck. I passed glass offices, each with nameplates not printed, but etched. When I reached the end of the corridor, I stopped. The new door was darker, heavier than the rest. Brushed steel. Matte finish. No fingerprints. On the center panel, engraved directly into the metal in all caps. Tyler Grayson, Chief Architect. I didn't pause for effect. Didn't wait for someone to applaud. I opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me with a soft click. My office was larger than the one I used to have at Elkins, but it didn't feel excessive. It felt precise. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the mountains. There was no concrete skyline choking the view, only possibility. The desk was minimalist. No clutter, just a terminal, a notebook, and one object in the corner drawer I'd brought from the past. The brass pen Elkins had given me on my 15th work anniversary. The one they forgot I kept even after they deleted my access, revoked my ID, and tried to erase my name. It was still engraved. To those who build quietly. I turned it over in my hand for a moment, then signed a final approval for Phoenix's new predictive logistics engine. Built from scratch, cleaner, smarter, safer. Every line of code mine. Every fail-safe intentional. Every lock secure. I didn't do it for legacy. I did it because I knew what happened when systems fell into the wrong hands. When I stood up to leave, my reflection caught in the glass. I looked the same, but I wasn't. This wasn't a return to what I lost. This was the life I was meant to build. On my terms. In ink. It came across my desk late on a Thursday afternoon. Just a simple internal memo, forwarded through Phoenix Tech's Strategic Operations channel. No subject line. No bold header. Just a clean PDF attachment and a timestamp that meant nothing at first glance. Until I opened it. Formal notice of merger negotiation. Elkins Technologies to enter contract discussions with Phoenix Global Systems. I read the line 3 times before it registered. They weren't just collapsing. They were crawling. For months, we had taken their clients. Not aggressively. Not with flashy announcements or boardroom power plays. Just clean execution. Solid infrastructure. Quiet competence. The kind of consistency that makes panicked customers abandon glossy promises and run straight into stability. We didn't market it. We didn't pitch it. We just did the job. And Elkins, once too proud to ask for help, too blind to see their own decay, was now at the table, negotiating terms not from strength, but necessity. But that wasn't the twist. It wasn't even the merger. It was the signature at the bottom of the document. Hugo Alvarez, acting CEO, Elkins Technologies. My eyes lingered on the name like it had been carved into the screen. The same Hugo who stood in my office doorway a year ago with his head bowed and his signature still wet on my termination papers. The same man who wouldn't meet my eyes when he said, "They gave me no choice." The same man who once said, "I've got 2 kids," like that somehow canceled out the decade of trust we had built line by line, project by project, crash by crash. Now he was signing on behalf of a company he once watched sink from the hallway as it pushed out the only person who could have saved it. He hadn't emailed me. Not when the server collapsed. Not when Sync Core trended worldwide for all the wrong reasons. Not when the lawsuits came rolling in. And not even now. But I knew he would. Eventually. Fate has a strange sense of choreography. It doesn't rush. It just waits for the beat to align. I closed the memo, walked to the far end of my office, and looked out over the late afternoon skyline. Phoenix was quieter than San Diego. Less noise, more space to think. More space to breathe. The sunlight caught the edge of my desk just right. I could see the faint shimmer of the brass pen, still resting in its carved stand, still bearing that line they once gave me with a plaque and a speech. To those who build quietly. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vindicated. What I felt was done. Not the kind of done that means finished. The kind that means complete. The circle had closed. The man who once avoided my gaze was now signing contracts to merge with the very system I rebuilt from the ashes of his betrayal. He was no longer gatekeeper. He was witness. And I was the architect now. No footnote. No courtesy title. No borrowed seat. My name was on the blueprint, the door, the company charter, and the future. It didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be true. It was just a building now. No longer the temple I once thought it was. No longer the machine I poured my life into. Just steel and glass and automatic doors that sighed open like they'd never once closed on me. 1 year after the collapse, 3 months after the merger was finalized, I walked through the front doors of what used to be Elkins Technologies. The logo was gone, replaced by clean, modern typography, Phoenix Global Systems, Logistics HQ. Same lobby, same polished floors, same faint lemon scent in the air from whatever high-end cleaner their facilities team still used. But the weight had lifted. I moved through it slowly, not like a ghost revisiting the past, but like an architect inspecting the structure of something he no longer needed to hold together. The marble reception desk was still there, though it had been upgraded. New interface panel, upgraded check-in kiosk, embedded facial scan tech I recognized from a proposal I'd written 5 years ago, but never got approval for back then. A young woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. "Welcome to Phoenix Global," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" I returned the smile. "No," I said, "just passing through." She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. And that was okay. I moved past her, down the corridor I once knew by heart, where I used to trace every step by instinct. The number of tiles from the elevator to my old office, the subtle flicker in the ceiling light near conference room D I always meant to report, but never did. I didn't linger at my old office. I didn't need to, because it wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been mine for a long time, and it never needed to be again. But as I passed by the far north hallway, the one no one ever used unless they worked infrastructure, I noticed something. A frame schematic, mounted in minimalist black aluminum. No label, no caption, just a clean, single-layer architecture diagram. I stopped in front of it. It was mine, not stolen, not co-opted, just preserved. The original 2019 system flow model. My predictive load-out blueprint. I knew every line, every node, every buffer delay margin etched in those curves. I'd drawn that schematic at 2:38 a.m. during a blackout in the Denver office, sketching it with a stylus on a half-responsive touchscreen, while Hugo rerouted our servers through a backup generator and I dictated logic rules into a coffee cup. Whoever had hung it here hadn't done it for display. They did it for memory, for context, for origin. I stood there for longer than I meant to, hands at my side, reading the lines like scripture, not for reverence, but for clarity. Not to remind myself what I'd built, but to remember who I was when I built it. Behind me, footsteps approached. Light, hesitant. "Mr. Grayson?" I turned. It was a younger man, mid-20s maybe, nervous posture, but eyes full of something rare in buildings like this. Honest curiosity. I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say, I'm on the new systems fellows. They showed us your Cascade logic file on our first day. I didn't even know code could think like that." I nodded, offering nothing more than a quiet thank you. He took a breath. "It's an honor," he added, then turned and disappeared back into the maze of hallways. I watched him go, then looked back at the diagram one last time. I didn't need applause. I didn't need attribution. Because the people who mattered, they already knew. They didn't need to say my name. They could just feel the architecture. And that was enough. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that waits to be filled, but the kind that earns its presence. A silence you don't interrupt. Not out of fear, but out of respect. It was late in the day. The filtered sun cast long, amber lines across the glass conference table in the Phoenix Tech Innovation Wing. Outside, the desert light was fading, but inside, something brighter was being signed into permanence. The patent sat in front of me. Not a prototype, not a proposal. A finished system. Clean, scalable, encrypted on 6 levels. It carried no legacy weight. No Elkins-era naming conventions. No bloated functions designed to impress board members who didn't know a line of code from a revenue chart. It was lean, responsive, smart, built not just to withstand the next decade of logistics pressure, but to adapt, learn, and protect itself when humans, as they always do, tried to break what they didn't understand. Every subroutine, every resilience test, every hidden lock. Mine. I lifted the brass pen. The same one I'd been given at my 15th anniversary at Elkins. The one I refused to throw away even after they stripped my ID and replaced me with a LinkedIn post. I twisted the pen slowly in my fingers, feeling the weight of it. The engraving was still there, slightly worn but visible. To those who build quietly, the irony of it used to sting. Now it steadied me. I signed the last line in a single stroke. No hesitation, no flourish. Just ink on paper. a permanent mark. When I looked up, Priya was already watching me from across the table, her fingers resting lightly on her closed notebook, her expression calm but unreadable, as always. "It's official," she said, her voice low, steady. "The patent is yours. The system is yours. The name is yours." Outside, I could hear the hum of the evening team working in the adjacent lab. Voices and low conversation. The occasional soft ping of code tests completing successfully. The world was still moving. But inside this room, inside this moment, it felt like something had just clicked into place. And it had, because for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't recovering. I was building, on my own terms, not for someone else's vision, not for a quarterly goal, not for a man who smiled through clenched teeth while handing me a severance folder. This wasn't retribution. This was resurrection. Later that evening, I found myself back in my office, door closed, lights dimmed, the city spread below in a grid of amber and blue. My desk was clean, just the terminal screen glowing faintly and a folder marked next. Inside it, the foundation for the next evolution of the system. An adaptive model that would learn user behavior patterns in real time, not just to optimize logistics, but to predict human error before it ever triggered disruption. The kind of system no one dare dream of because they never trusted machines to protect us from ourselves. But I did, because I had been that machine. I stood at the edge of the office, hands in my pockets, and looked toward the mountains. They were barely visible now, just jagged outlines against the navy sky. And yet I could feel them, ancient, unmoved, still standing, just like me. I wasn't interested in public speeches. I wasn't interested in press coverage. Let Madison have her fail brand. Let Elkins disappear behind another name on another lobby sign. Let Hugo carry the weight of paperwork I would never read. That wasn't my story anymore. That wasn't my battlefield. My war had ended quietly, with a line of code, a signature, in a room full of engineers who looked at me and didn't ask where I'd been. They asked what came next. And that was all I ever wanted. Not legacy, not credit, just continuity. As I shut down the terminal and reached for my coat, I whispered the words I hadn't said aloud since that day they fired me. The day they thought removing a name from an access list meant removing the mind behind it. Still standing. This time, not defiant, just true. And I walked out into the night, not to prove them wrong, but to keep building what they were never meant to understand. Sometimes, the greatest act of power is not shouting louder. It's choosing silence when you know the system will speak for you. Tyler Grayson's story isn't just about revenge. It's not about crashing servers or outsmarting CEOs. It's about something deeper. It's about dignity in exile. It's about building quietly when no one's watching and standing firmly when everyone's looking the other way. It's about being erased and choosing not to disappear. What you create, what you build, what you give your nights and weekends and your loyalty to, it matters. And even if the world tries to take credit, rewrite history, or replace you with something shinier, truth has memory. And systems, unlike people, don't lie. They remember who wrote the code. So if you've ever been overlooked, replaced, underestimated, or told you were too quiet, too seasoned, too much, let this story remind you. You don't have to burn down the old world to build a new one. You just have to keep building. And one day, you'll walk back through the front door, not as a guest, as the name on the wall. If this story hits something real inside you, if you've ever had to prove your worth after being told you didn't belong, smash that like button so this message reaches someone else who needs it. Drop a fire in the comments if you've ever walked away just to come back stronger. And tell us, what would you rebuild if no one could stop you? Subscribe to this channel for more stories that aren't just about surviving, but about rising. Because sometimes the quietest ones are the ones who end up rewriting the system.